Einen wunderschönen guten Abend für euch und morgen für uns aus Kalifornien. Hello and welcome to our webcast, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Stanford Graduate School of Business and Beyond. My name is Tim Eisenmann and I'm a second-year MBA student here at the GSB. I am very proud to be graduating in just a couple of weeks. Also a bit sad. I'm joined by Desiree Peill and Dominik Facher. Like me, they are from Germany. They are first-year MBA students and will graduate in 2016. We'll be talking about the student experience here on campus and answer as many of your questions as we can, including those submitted in advance. We won't be talking about the admissions process, the application, or financial aid. You can find these answers on the Stanford MBA website. To submit a question to us about what it's like to be a student, just click the chat icon at the top of your screen, enter your question in the chat window, and click Send to All in your screen. To kick us off, I'd suggest that maybe we introduce ourselves a little bit so you know who you'll be hearing from today. Desiree, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. My name is Desiree. I'm an MBA 1 student here at the GSB. Prior to the GSB, I worked in consulting with the focus on media. I did my undergrad in Switzerland, in St. Gallen, and after that worked a lot for various media companies as a journalist and then later on the business side. And I'm very happy to be here at the GSB and excited to talk to you about it today.
Thanks. So I'm Dominik, originally from Munich. I grew up a little bit outside the city, so all countryside, mountains, outdoors. That's what I enjoyed during the youth time. And when you're not outside and you're in the countryside, the first thing that comes to mind when you don't do that is like computers. So I always was very attached to technology. I studied computer science as a result of that, studied in Munich and in Zurich. And after that, we started a company in the field of recruiting, social networks. So I worked as a software engineer there. And after we finished up with that company, I worked in consulting as well, mainly in the technology space. And now I'm here at the GSB as well.
As I said already, my name is Tim. I'm from Frankfurt originally. I used to work in transportation for Lufthansa, one of the big German companies, in corporate strategy for 2.5 years. Then did a lot of transportation focus here at the GSB. We founded a class. I was president of the Travel and Hospitality Club. And also did a little bit of work in the social impact sector in Africa, 2 very different things. And post-GSB, I'll be doing consulting in the airline and transportation sector as well. Well, let's maybe get a head start and go and answer one of the questions that was submitted in advance. Why do you guys apply to Stanford or business school in general? What were the driving factors and why Stanford in particular? Maybe Dominik, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, it's basically the place to be, right? So I wanted to be in the Silicon Valley, because this place is really where sort of the future gets built. This is where all the big companies, all the ideas come together, and Stanford for me was sort of really central in that ecosystem, and I think it's a very special place in that sense that you find in very few business schools, if any, actually. So that was a key driver for me, and besides that, I was always sort of torn to that technology part of it, so that made it sort of an easy choice for me to choose Stanford as a business school. And then you asked sort of why business school in general. So for me, it was always, I come very much from the technology and engineering side. And at some point realized that sort of there's a business side as well to it. I learned a little bit of that in consulting, but essentially I saw like the very small companies when they get started, and I saw the really big companies as like the really, really big ones, but I never saw this place in between. And so for me, it was always like, how does this go from really small to scaling it pretty big? And part of that is actually scaling yourself, right? So how can you scale yourself, as in you have a team of 3 people and then suddenly you're 1,000 people or even more?
Yeah.
Like how can you manage that? And a lot of that is personal skills, leadership skills, etc. And this for me was sort of the main driver for business school in general.
How about you, Desiree?
So why I chose to apply to business school, I feel like after 3 years in consulting, I just felt like a Fachidiot after some time, where you just like focus on one specific topic, get pretty good at it, but it's you kind of miss a broader horizon, and I felt that in particular Stanford would offer that the most to me. In particular, looking at the ecosystem here, the same you talked about, it feels like a little bit, I think like Florence must have felt like that in the Renaissance, where like everything is happening exactly in this little tiny piece of land, and it's just exciting to be here. And then more specifically for me, in media and journalism, it's a hugely disrupted, the industry is hugely disrupted at the moment by a lot of the things that are going on here, and so I was just very excited to learn about it and to know more of what is going on there.
It does take a little bit of convincing and telling other people, though, because business school isn't that commonly known as a career path in Germany. In the US, it's a bit different. But it does bring us closer to our goals, at least when I speak for myself. Maybe we can add on to what you said, Desiree, about being here in an ecosystem of entrepreneurship while having a very strong background in media. How has the GSB helped you get closer to what you want to do after Stanford?
So, kind of coming here, I knew that there is the Arts, Media, and Entertainment Club, for example, which I am the president of right now, which is doing a lot of things in the school, kind of bringing media executive here, bringing companies here to talk about what's going on in the industry. Then furthermore, there are a bunch of classes which are kind of hugely tailored to exactly that space. So there's one about leadership and entertainment. I'm taking another one, actually not at the business school, but on campus in Stanford, which is called entrepreneurial media. And so we are kind of in that class already working in teams and working on business ideas and pitching it to investors this Friday, actually, and trying to figure out whether we have found something which is interesting. And so overall, I think the GSB is helping me also personally to look at all these different spaces. It's very easy to actually contact people and get them to talk to you about these things. And so it's been kind of from clubs, from the classes, but then also from people who come to the GSB and talking to them about the topic.
I mean, the @stanford.edu email address opens any door you want to have opened. And Dominik is casually starting his own company while on campus. Maybe you can speak about that a little.
Yeah, sure. And also, like, I fully agree with what Desiree said. I mean, for me, it was never really a traditional career path post GSB, so I never had that in mind. And there's a lot of classmates who have that. If, for example, if you go into banking, etc., it's a very clear path. That for me was never the case, and not part of making the decision towards going to business school. But it's all those other elements that come together, and I think it makes a key difference from the GSB. So first of all, there is the network that you get, right? The access you get to people. So for example, I'm in a class with Peter Levine right now, who's the enterprise software partner from Andreessen Horowitz, which is like, it's probably the best VC that you can find out there, right? And so you really have access and very close connection to those people, and it's really tremendous. And as Tim said, we're sort of starting our own business right now, and if you have access to those people and really can have a casual chat with them and ask them certain questions that you have, it just makes a huge difference, right? And this is sort of the thing. Then you get the introduction, and then you get the next step, and most of the stuff that you actually try to do, you're right at the center of where your customers are, where the ideas get sparked, and you get all this inspiration from other schools, as like, it's just a 5-minute walk and you're in computer science, right? Which is probably also the best computer science department in the world. So it's really, it all comes together in this weird thing of ecosystem. And in a non-traditional career path, I think this is what makes the difference, and that you have access to all of those opportunities and just can go into it.
One thing I just want to add is that even if you have a very particular interest, such as media, I know a couple of people that are in biotech. The GSB does offer a lot of classes already, but then across the street and basically all the other faculties, Stanford GSB students can take classes as well. So there are a couple of classmates that have only taken the minimum of GSB classes and taken advantage of all the across the street classes. A lot of people take the base coding class just so they know how to speak with technical co-founders. Let's maybe pivot to some of the questions that were submitted right now. How has the different education style U.S. versus German-speaking countries played out for you guys? What were the major differences?
So I think for me, it was just so even though I studied at a small university, classes were still massively huge. So here I have classes from 20 to 70 people, and it's
or even smaller, lead labs, 12.
Yeah, 12 is true, and it's fascinating because you
smaller than 12.
4 actually. Yeah. Sorry, it was a year ago.
And it's fascinating to have kind of everybody participating a lot more, and that's also something you have to get used to. It's kind of much more interactive. People are expecting you to speak up. It's slightly different than back in where I studied. But then also, I think we've been kind of educated to not be as controversial when we kind of make statements and things like that. And discussions don't come up that easily, but this is entirely different here, and people just speak their minds, and there's always an interesting discussion going on in the classroom.
Yeah. Let's so maybe have you talk about how you make the most out of what's happening on campus. I mean, there's so many activities. What do you prioritize? Was it overwhelming at first, and how have you managed to do it now?
Definitely overwhelming. The thing is, you can do whatever you want, right? So if you're curious about things, there's everything going on. And so one of the things for me coming in was to sometimes not do the smart things, but the sort of more interesting and curiosity-driven things. And you can do whatever you want, basically. So if there's a session on virtual reality, you just learn more about virtual reality, or all those crazy things that are going on and sort of the edges, and that oftentimes you don't have access to when you're not in a university context. And so this is sort of the curiosity part for me, and the other part with resources is when you think about actually a business and starting something, there's tremendous resources available, from events to personal coachings to sort of classes where you can actually learn those things directly, and you get mentors that help you, etc. And yeah, so at the end of the day, I remember when we started, you basically leave your home at 8 o'clock and then you come back at 10 o'clock. You were like busy the whole day. For me, it was more busy than during when I was working.
Yeah. That means Dominik does not go out and parties if he comes home at 10 a.m.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean,
he's a boring software engineer.
Yeah, but that's about it. You go to bed. Maybe you party, maybe you don't. But you go to bed and you're sort of it's this happy sort of stress, right?
Yeah.
So you just feel like there was so much going on, and you feel exhausted, but at the same time it's this good sort of exhaustion. And yeah, sometimes you need to prioritize, but my thing was always to keep more the filter open and take in as much as possible, rather than the other way around.
I would totally agree with that. In particular, this idea that you kind of just get everything kind of bombarded at you, but on the other hand, it's your own stress. So prior in consulting, it's always like a partner giving you stress or the client giving you stress. But right now, it's like all about you, and you can decide everything, and it's incredibly energizing as well.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the questions that just came in asked about the background of your classmates. Well, a whole bunch of them are internationals just like us. There are, of course, a lot of classmates from South America, a lot from Asia, Central Europe as well. I think in my class we had a lot of Germans, French, Spanish students. But it varies. I mean, there's no set amount of people that come from a specific country. It really depends on the application pool of that specific year. But maybe you can talk about some classmates that have been especially inspiring and have had a really interesting professional background.
Sure.
Desiree.
So I think for me, we have musical stars, people who were on American Idol, for example, and they have the most beautiful voices, incredible artistic talent. Which is we have a big show every year where people kind of produce a one-time musical, and it's as professional as you would see on Broadway. And that was something which I didn't even expect coming here, and I was incredibly impressed. Then right now, I just come out of a classroom where somebody talked about their operations experience at Formula One and how he, for 7 years, worked as a manager and general manager in the Middle East for the Formula One team of Williams, thank you. I'm a huge Formula One fan, obviously, but it's just entirely different than a lot of others. think I can think of like more and more. Do you have
Yeah.
some more?
Yeah, I mean, same. And for me, what was pretty interesting was talking to people who were in the military before, which is something that was really not present whatsoever before in sort of the European education, and like really hearing how they experienced their lives before and whatever happened. I mean, you can hardly imagine. It just gives you a lot of perspective, right? And that happens to all different sorts of people. Like, I don't know, we have professional poker players, whatsoever. It's really interesting, and essentially it's different perspectives on things you had in mind before, and you just challenge it.
And maybe just to give so we have each week we have two classmates actually sharing their story and sharing their entire lives with us in a 30-minute talk. It's every Monday for the MBA ones and every Wednesday for the MBA twos, and it's kind of that's the moment where you get to know them and you know so much more about where they come from, the life they've been living before, what has shaped them, who they are today, and it's kind of a very inspiring way to actually get to know people.
I mean, at first it's a lot of, hey, what have you been doing? Where are you from? What did you do beforehand? And then the GSB, I think, finds good ways to connect people in smaller, more meaningful settings. Talk is one of them. But there are tons of small group dinners that are actually supported by the university financially. There are WIM groups where women come together and talk about their experience in maybe more male-dominated environments or at business school. And then, of course, the clubs, as you've mentioned, does host a variety of events with people that have a similar interest, so they get to know each other on a deeper level. And then all the outside stuff. Like, I've actually gotten to know more people playing tennis than with any other thing at the GSB.
And I mean, beyond that, I think it's not just those kinds of events, but also that the class size is smaller in general, right? So I mean, we're 400 people roughly.
Yeah, I think so.
And I, like for me, it was something that you can actually get to know 400 people and quite well, right? And versus if it would be 1,000 or more people, I'm not sure I could get to know each and everyone in that sense. And you always have this moment of where you actually want to get to know everyone and hear those stories whatsoever. And I think 400 people is a size where you have enough interaction on a regular basis, so that it works.
So let's dial back for you guys probably a year and a half. You were thinking about applying to business school. How did you know that was the right time?
Good question.
Was it the right time?
For me, there was no such question, actually. Like, I didn't particularly design this process of now it's the time to apply, so it never crossed my mind in that sense. I always had this notion in mind that I need to sort of get back and need the time to sort of develop those more leadership, more long-term oriented skills, especially from a empathy, people perspective. And I think business school is a good place to do that. And especially the focus that the GSB gives on sort of this empathetic leadership and leadership development, I think is a good thing about that. And it just felt right in terms of I want to do the next step. But I never specifically designed a timeline where I knew it was right. So, yeah.
What about for you? Because I think for us we had a more traditional kind of consulting path, and it's kind of suggested to you, but you decided that.
So I was very fed up with my job. I learned a ton, and I had great colleagues, but it was a very hierarchical, German corporate environment, and I was basically told I'm doing a great job, but in order to take on more responsibility, I have to do the same job for another 5 years. Maybe with a different title, but basically the same thing. And there were a bunch of options on the table, either changing jobs or going to business school. I decided that I would give it a shot, Harvard or Stanford, because I figured that if I spend that much money, I might as well do it on one of those schools that have a huge brand recognition. And then that worked out well, and then I figured I would come in and do it. So similar to Dominik, I hadn't mapped it out. Had it not worked, I might have spent another year at my job. I might have gone to a different business school, but I did not have the 5-year plan. So let's move to another question from the audience. That's actually an interesting one. So how has the Stanford experience been different to what you guys expected? Is there anything you did not come see besides the fact that there are opera and musical stars in the class?
I think for me, what has surprised me is that how much kind of social activity there is. So for me, I think I'm an introvert by nature, and just like coming here and the way how much there is and how much there is to experience and how much energy that actually takes was new to me. So I've never experienced as many dinners, as many parties, as many everythings. And so it's kind of a very intense environment, not only from a kind of school perspective and everything else that's going on in your mind, but also just socially. And it's a happy surprise because it's wonderful, but it also takes a lot of energy and kind of brain space to think about how all of us social activity kind of comes together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agree. That's definitely. What was surprising for me is we joked about it before, right? It actually rains in California. They don't tell you that before.
Well, twice a year. And those 2 days have been the last two. No, actually, it has been fairly good. Yeah. I was actually surprised how cool people are. Because when you think about business school, you think of that as being one of the puzzle pieces in your professional life. But I think also in the personal life, it has shaped me a lot because it gives you 2 years to breathe, take a step back, look at what you've done, look at who you are, and look at what you want to do after. And I thought it would be a way to acquire some more tools in order to be a better manager. But I think the introspection, the level of self-reflection, and the time I had for that was pretty impressive. And one class in particular that we have to basically talk about is touchy-feely, interpersonal dynamics. Desiree has taken it, Dominik not yet, so he does not know what we're talking about. What it basically is I think 12 people or 16 people? 12 people in a room without instructions, a script, anything. 2 facilitators, but basically 12 people sitting next to each other and having nothing to talk about. And then you start talking about things. For example, I might ask Desiree, hey, should we talk about norms and when to arrive for class? And then Desiree might tell me, well, Tim, by you asking that question, you implicitly took on a leadership role in this class, and
which I'm not comfortable with.
I don't feel comfortable with that. And you get feedback on your actions live, and in a way you usually don't get it in a work environment.
Yeah, that actually speaks to one of the questions around kind of how to develop your soft skills and know more about your strengths and weaknesses, and it's phenomenal because so I'm just in the last.
You said you fell in love with the class.
Sorry. I have my last class tomorrow, where we share the final feedback, which is basically 5 hours of feedback to 12 people in a room, and it's only one kind of small piece of it. In general, we spend a lot of time during that class sitting around together and just learning about each other, learning what actually works, what doesn't, what works for you, how do you react to things. You just get a lot more self-aware and know what works for you. But you also learn a lot about how other people interact and kind of trying to hone your skills of how to actually work in groups and how that works. So I thought it was a kind of phenomenal experience when it comes to soft skills. But there are also a lot of others. So maybe you want to switch to leaders.
Yeah, and I think in general, even beyond that, that's just one element. But what was surprising for me is how deliberately the GSB actually shapes culture, right? And you spend a lot of time talking about norms and how people interact together, and all of those different sessions and courses come together, and you develop a culture. And for me, it was really surprising to see that it's almost like you engineer a certain culture, right? And this openness, vulnerability, feedback, etc. It feels almost like a DNA of the GSB, and we've been through the first year, right? And now it seems like almost we sort of got that DNA, and we feel comfortable with it, and sort of live it ourselves. So I think that's
I'm almost worried to go back to the real world and experience everybody's not as vulnerable and open and sharing and caring as we are here.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very special environment here, and there's certain things you can take back into the real world, and some things you might want to keep for yourself. Talking about the real world, what are you guys going to do over the summer? Maybe you could talk about the recruiting process for summer internships. Where are you guys going to head out in 2 weeks? Dominik's going to stay here.
Exactly, I'm going to stay here, so I cannot talk too much about recruiting process. Maybe you can add a little bit after that. But Yeah, we're using the summer and this very specific 3 month period to actually start a business in the insurance space. So we're trying to use technology and insurance and build something around that. And yeah, I think it sort of felt like the first year for me was taking a step back, learning a lot of new things, but also building out a team to do that, right? And so one of the team members actually from the GSB right now, and it sort of was this whole sort of ramping up period for that. And so instead of recruiting, we sort of did a business plan and whatsoever, so you can probably substitute that. Yeah, but for the summer, I'm actually staying here in Palo Alto, and yeah, we're starting a business here.
So I maybe took a more traditional recruiting path. There are a bunch of on-campus recruiting events, companies coming to campus, talking about their recruiting process, and then starting that process. Mainly big corporates from the US, some from Europe, consulting companies, finance companies. That is, the on-campus recruiting. Then there is, I would say, like a smaller SME recruiting. One of the key events at the GSB is the fewer than 300 event, where companies that have less than 300 employees come to campus, and it's very informal, casual setting, and you get to talk to up-and-coming companies, Eventbrite, and those kind of companies, usually tech in the Valley. And then there's networking-based recruiting, so you can meet with career management employees, and they help you kind of find people that work in the space that you wanna be in, and connect you directly. Given that the class size is fairly small with 400, the community is very strong. So even if people 20 years before you graduate and are now in an interesting position, they will usually return your email or your call and get back to you. And I see we're almost running out of time. That went by quickly. We're 4 more minutes to go. Before we go, Dominik, Desiree, any words of final advice for the people that are thinking about applying to Stanford, and your GSB highlight in year number 1? Ladies first, I guess.
Yeah. So, in terms of advice, I would say kind of fighting through this whole application process and through the GMAT and all of that is a lot of work, and it's kind of stressful, especially for me. It was like stressful period doing that kind of next to your job, but it's incredibly worth it. And this time here has been one of the most amazing of my life, and so I'm incredibly thankful, and just want to tell you that it's gonna be like coming out of this whole process, you're gonna be here, and it's wonderful. What's the most amazing moment for me? I think there have been a few of them.
You can only have one.
It's very hard.
All right.
All
right. You can think of one. Maybe you'll come up with one afterwards. Dominik?
Yeah, same here. I think just do it is probably a good way to I think people tell you that the application process itself is valuable. For me, back then, it was sort of, I couldn't believe that, but it actually is in a certain way, because it forces you to reflect yourself, forces you to engage also the people you ask for a recommendation on a very deeper feedback conversation, and sort of get all of those things together. So I think just do it is probably the right thing for me to say. And when it comes to favorite moment, it's hard to pinpoint, because there's actually so much happening. Like it feels like one day of GSB is probably like a week of normal life.
It's like with dogs, like 1 year is like 3 human lives or something.
Yeah. But I think what was really cool experience in general is sort of the GST, what we do here. So we have to do this global study trips. I took the global route to the US, actually. But it's sort of this study trip where you actually get to know a country deeper and better. And you're in a group of 20, 30 people, roughly. You have a lot of meetings with professionals, with politicians, industry leaders, to get a sort of the culture, but you also get to know your peers really well. I think this GST experience for me was pretty cool. And I mean, we had phenomenal meetings. Like we've been to New York, for example, where we met Michael Bloomberg, and you have a pretty intense and open discussion with those people. And for me, this was
cool.
Was a pretty cool experience.
My piece of advice: be yourself. Really showcase what makes you different, and don't talk about what makes you similar to a lot of people that might have gone to the GSB. The class aims to be as diverse as possible. So whatever makes you special should definitely be in the application. And my highlight was in my first year, I had been working in Rwanda, and I had the chance to have lunch with Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, which was really interesting, getting to speak to a person like that one-on-one. And I think that's basically it. Thank you so much, Desiree and Dominik, for joining us this morning, and thanks to all of you for participating. If you'd like to hear more about the GSB, you can meet an MBA admissions officer in person while they travel to many cities throughout Europe this summer. I believe Germany, Austria, and Switzerland are probably amongst their route. Please keep an eye out for the invitations to meet them, or check the events page on the Stanford MBA website. You can also learn more about the MBA program, admissions requirements, and financial aid on the website. The application for the class starting in the fall of 2016 will be available in June. Finally, please take a moment to answer a few survey questions about your experience with us today. Once the webcast ends, click the OK button on the pop-up window and you will be directed automatically to the survey. Thanks again, have a great day und auf Wiedersehen.
Tschüss.
Ciao.